We had this big Apple announcement, 3 new phones. We had the iPhone 10, we had the iPhone 8, 2 models of that, Apple 4K TV. What did you think about it?
The fall Apple update is always sort of a fun Apple update.
Yeah.
You know, we have developers conference, which they talk about stuff that developers care about, but this is the one where, you know, we get to learn about all the stuff that's going to be out for holiday, you know, so we got new iPhones. You know, we had sort of a lot of information going in. We sort of heard a lot of rumors, most of which turned out to be true.
Right.
Which is sort of a new thing, like that didn't used to happen.
Right.
You know, but now it's maybe a little less exciting because we knew about them, but still, you know, so much new hardware to talk about. Like, that's what we really want.
Yeah, so a lot of leaks, a lot of things weren't that surprising. iPhone 10, price of about $1,000. Are you excited about it? Do you feel like it's something you might buy someday, or pretty steep price tag on that?
iPhone 10 is a weird thing for Apple. The idea is that it has this edge-to-edge screen. Like, that's the thing they made the big deal about. And they took it to the extent where the phone has rounded corners, so the screen has rounded corners, and you get 5.8 inches of diagonal screen, which is actually, I think that's more than the iPhone 7 Plus and 8 Plus, but you're getting it in a smaller form factor because it goes all the way to the edges, which is pretty interesting. It's also the first OLED screen that Apple's using, which is sort of a big step for them. And you know, they talked about some of the challenges that happen with OLED, and that you get these deep blacks and you get these bright colors, but they're not always the most accurate colors, which you know, they've sort of worked out by now. So I don't know, I'm pretty excited to see the screen in person.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those things that's going to have much more impact when we see it like in your hand and you see all the pixels. It's like over 458 pixels per inch, I think, Super Retina display.
Yeah.
Which is going to look ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know, with that big screen, they've done away with the home button. So it's interesting, you know, Apple's been like training us for years to push the home button to get home. Now there is no home button, so new gesture, you swipe up from the bottom to get home. You can do that in any app. And I'm wondering how they're going to kind of make that square with the control center, because you know, now you swipe up to get to the control center, and I guess with the new iPhone 10. Swipe up to get home, there you won't be able to get to the control center that way. So it's interesting, we've kind of learned these gestures and rhythms, and now we're gonna have to learn some new ones.
Yeah, it took me a really long time to get used to just Touch ID, because it used to be with the iPhone 4 or 5S or whatever I had before, I wanted to see my notifications, so I'd push the button, bring up the notifications, and then I moved to a 6S or whatever when it had Touch ID, and all of a sudden I push that button and it unlocks the phone and all my notifications are gone, you know, and it took me a really long time, like a surprising, maybe disappointing amount of time to learn to not do that. You know, now you can just, you know, turn it over and it turns on, which is great. But, you know, there is going to be a learning curve for it. And I think it's also going to be interesting, you know, we're eventually getting to it now. We talked about no more home button, is that this new true depth camera with facial recognition. Where I'm going to have to get, you know, anyone who uses is going to have to get used to unlocking the phone with your face.
It's using some like artificial intelligence in an interesting way. So they're talking about these neural networks, or this kind of neural engine they've built where, you know, the phone kind of learns the way your face looks at first, kind of creates a mathematical, you know, image of your face, and then takes your face and then kind of matches it back to the original. And they're using, like, there's some really kind of new interesting sensors in the phone that are kind of helping to do that, kind of a flood illuminator, something called like a dot projector that's kind of make all this happen so that it can even kind of learn as your face changes. You know, if your beard gets longer, or you don't shave one day, it's still going to be able to recognize you and kind of match it back to that original image and kind of learn how your face changes.
Yeah, the whole idea of like the dot tracking, it seems like mocap. You know, like you see those guys when they're, you know, the NBA players, and they're capturing them for video games. That's what I imagine. But apparently, yeah, 30,000 points on your face, which is pretty interesting. And, you know, the facial recognition stuff already does exist. You know, like Microsoft, when I log into my Surface Pro, it looks at my face and it uses near infrared. So I'm curious to see, you know, the AI seems to be the differentiator here, and like the system they're using to actually recognize your face, because the Microsoft version, I use it, it works, but it doesn't always work. And there doesn't seem to be really a way to tell when it's gonna work and when it's not.
Yeah, and like the Samsung S8 and the Note 8, you know, they have a Face ID unlock system. It's a little bit less secure than their other kind of biometrics, but they're doing it with just the single front-facing camera in that case. And in this case, Apple's, you know, kind of working with kind of like a plethora of sensors in the front to try to do it in a kind of more three-dimensional, we think, way that will hopefully make it kind of more secure and less likely to be fooled by something.
Right, and they're also using that depth information like they do on the back camera, where they say now if you take a selfie, you can add portrait mode or whatever to it, but they can use that depth to sort of fake those.
Right, like
effects.
the new portrait lighting effects with the kind of dual cameras. And,
right.
So it's interesting, we saw the iPhone 10 with the Face ID feature, it doesn't have the Touch ID. We have Siri now, instead of pushing the home button to activate her, we do it on the side button with the iPhone 10. And then the iPhone 8, the iPhone 8 Plus and just the regular size iPhone 8. Like the iPhone 10, it has a glass front and a glass back, and kind of stainless steel edges, I think. Any takeaways from the iPhone 8 that kind of caught your eye?
Yeah, I think the iPhone 8 Plus is the one I want to buy.
Yeah.
Like that's the one I want.
Yeah.
It's I think it's interesting that they're going back to glass on the back.
Right.
And the now and the front, obviously. Otherwise it looks pretty similar. I like the iPhone 7 Plus a lot. And the iPhone 8 seems like a pretty iterative step, going forward.
Right.
It doesn't. There's not like a huge, gap. It's just the next iPhone.
It is, yeah, and I think it's nice. They kind of I think threw the kind of common folks a bone with the iPhone 8 also having wireless charging. I had kind of assumed going into this that the iPhone 10 would have the kind of wireless charging, but I wasn't sure if the kind of more iterative model would also have wireless charging. So it's nice that it has that, in my opinion.
Yeah, the wireless charging was an interesting overall concept. It was really interesting to see at the end of the keynote to see them talk about future tech.
Right.
Where they said that they're going to use this was air power.
Air
is that
power,
what it's
yeah,
called?
the big mat, exactly.
And for them to talk about something that's coming out relatively soon. They do that sometimes, but I think it's interesting to see that them putting it out there that this thing is going to work across the whole system.
Right. And as someone for me, I have a lot of Apple products. I'm kind of slightly ashamed to admit, and the fact that I could charge an iPhone with an Apple Watch and AirPods all next to each other on a sleek little white mat actually makes me very happy. Although I worry that I'm going to actually spend all the money to make that happen, and then I'm going to be poor.
Well, and you can already kind of do that, because the underlying technology that they're using is out there. It's just that it's kludgy in a lot, because a lot of times your stuff doesn't all work together, and you need to put your phone in a special case, or you need to plug in like a little dongle to the bottom, which is, that defeats the entire purpose of it. Like, why don't you just plug in the cord? Right. But I thought it was interesting to see that. I'm excited that the iPhone 8s is getting that. I think that'll be really cool. One of the things they talked about a lot was the camera stuff. And I obviously care very much about cameras. But I think it's interesting that they're sort of making these procedural steps to improve the camera, where they're saying, okay, the sensors are going to be a little bigger now. They're still 12 megapixels, which is I think it's really a sweet spot for them, because they're not trying to do too much with too many pixels, which I think is good.
One interesting thing coming down the pike also with iOS 11, which will be on all these phones, is that Apple's switching to a new photo format, this HEIF photo format, with HEIF, which I'm kind of excited about. It's kind of independent from the hardware announcements today, but the new HEIF photo format will have more colors to it, and each photo you take will take up less space on your phone, so you can cram twice as many selfies on there. So I think that's exciting too.
JPEG has been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's 1992.
Time for something new.
It's really old.
to try it out. Yeah. But I'm pretty excited. I think iPhone 8 is, I don't know how crazy excited I am for it, but I mean, iPhone 8 is I think the winner of the, maybe it got overshadowed by it.
Right. I mean, it's going to cost, I think the iPhone 8 Plus starts at around $800, so that's $200 cheaper than the iPhone 10, and you're still going to be getting a great phone, that also has wireless charging and beautiful display, great camera system. They introduced this thing called, I think, portrait effects, where you can kind of dynamically change the lighting on somebody's face when you're taking their portrait. They had portrait mode already. This is a slightly kind of new thing to that. So I think there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah. I personally am not excited at all about the lighting effects. I think that they
As a kind of tried and true photographer,
yeah, I think that they look like they need a lot of work so far.
Right.
Because they're very obvious tricks, especially if you're used to editing photos on a like, I think it's cool that they're doing it with AI and they're trying to learn, but
Right.
I think it has a very, very long way to go.
Right.
Even if you look at even portrait mode, which I like portrait, I think portrait mode is good, but if you look at some of the photos on the iPhone 10 site, like you can see clearly where it's like, oh, this part of her hair is in focus and this part
Right.
is just way out of focus.
I've noticed that on portrait mode, actually, that the photo can kind of be blurred, or the hair can be blurred in the photo kind of incorrectly. And it's interesting to see the way, kind of Apple can use software updates to hopefully make those things better in conjunction with the hardware.
Yeah, one camera thing that they did talk about though is AR, and like
Yeah.
that demo. I think the demo of the game, I think it was called The Machines, that they showed, where they were playing basically a tabletop game in
Right.
augmented reality. That looked really cool to me.
Right. I've also seen like some interesting AR apps coming down the pipe. For example, like in the original Star Wars, where they're on the Millennium Falcon and they're playing a game with these little holographic creatures that are kind of fighting with each other. There's an AR kit, like enabled game coming down the pike, where you kind of look through your phone and you kind of see that game happening. So like a lot of exciting things that are going to be coming with AR, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And they even sort of name-checked Warhammer, which is like a game that's been around forever, and it's been played in dark rooms with big tables, and you have to measure with tape measures and
Right.
stuff, and it's like a natural progression for that. I'm really excited for some of those things.
Yeah, and even like IKEA's app, I think in the future will make use of AR kits. So you could, you're looking at your living room, you look at it through the phone, and you can plug, put a couch there, or a chair, or a table, and
Yeah, and I think there's going to be some competition there that's going to help, because Windows and Microsoft has really doubled down really hard on their what they call a mixed reality, but it's really just mostly augmented reality,
Yeah.
But they're baking it into Windows 10. So like all Windows 10 native devices, if they have a front-facing camera, are going to be able to just do this AR stuff, which I
Right.
think is going to really push people to like try hard and make it good. And I mean, there's also the new processors. That's one of the big things about iPhone 10 is that it has the new A11 Bionic, right?
Right.
That's what it's called.
Yeah. 6 cores, and then in the iPhone 10, they've built in kind of a neural engine as well, some new hardware there just for AI. So there's a lot going on under the hood.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting to see Phil sort of gloss over the numbers.
Right.
Where they said there's 6 cores, 4 of which are 25% more efficient, and 2 of which are 70% more efficient than
Right.
the cores before. Like, that seems pretty substantial, but I think people just sort of glaze over.
I think anytime you start talking about chip specs and you start talking about threading and cores,
Right.
it means a lot to the people who really understand that hardware, stuff very well. But I think for the rest of us, it's a lot of kind of jargon. But I guess the point is that it'll be faster.
Yeah, it'll be faster. And also, I think one of the other things about the iPhone 10 that's interesting is that, we talked about how you get more screen, but in a smaller format. But that also means that they made a new case.
Right.
So they already sort of did the R&D. They have this new case now. And, for Apple to talk about, okay, this is what the future of the phone looks like, that he's probably being literal and being
Right.
like, we spend all the money to make this case for this phone.
Yeah, the stainless steel bezel around it. Yeah,
Right,
or
you're
the
probably
structure.
going to see it for a while now.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting concept to start with this really high-end phone and say, okay, you early adopters buy it for a lot of money.
Right.
Let's try and recoup some of this money already.
Yeah, I mean, we may see the tech from the iPhone 10 kind of trickle down into the next edition. So, the 8S, the 9, do they lack fingerprint sensors and just use Face ID, but come in at kind of a lower price point, a year or two from now, so that
Right.
you're paying a premium now to have the most expensive tech, but it may be baked into later iPhones.
Yeah, which is cool. Trickle down works in terms of phones.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe not so much in terms of other stuff, but when it comes
Yeah.
to phones.
So it wasn't just phones today. We had Apple Watch that's now getting a cellular connection and a 4K Apple TV. So anything about those that kind of got you excited, or is kind of like humdrum little iterative updates? What do you think?
I think Apple TV 4K is cool, but I think it's sort of catching up at this point. You can buy a 4K Roku. One of the things that Apple has going for it is, it has the built-in HDR and it has the 4K, and they're wrapping it all up in tvOS. And then they're saying, they're going to have all this content that you can watch, because that's one of the hard parts, is trying to sort of standardize the content you can watch, because you can buy a TV that costs $8,000,
Right.
looks awesome, but you have like, I don't know what I can watch on it. Like, some things on Netflix will work and some things on Amazon won't. And I think like Apple has an opportunity to be like, look, it might cost more to get your movies through us, but we can tell you for sure that they're going to be in HDR. You're going to get the
Right.
most colors out of your movies. And I think it's also cool that if you bought a movie through the iTunes store and it gets the upgrade, that you're going to get the upgrade.
I was very happy to hear that a 4K movie will not cost any more than an HD movie.
Right.
And if you already own the HD movie and it becomes available in 4K, you get the 4K version for free. So it's very nice not to be nickel and dimed in that way.
Yeah, it was interesting to see them sort of talk about that, supporting media infrastructure stuff. Because they mentioned Apple Music a lot.
Right.
But there wasn't a section of the presentation about Apple Music. It was just, oh, and by the way, this works with Apple Music. Oh, and by the way, the Apple Watch now can play Apple Music.
Right.
Which I thought is really kind of smart.
Yeah, it was kind of like baked right in there. And speaking of the Apple Watch, it'll now have a cellular data connection, and so you could stream your music, or stream actually music from Apple Music straight to your wrist if you wanted to listen to it while you were jogging. I think the fact that it can now make phone calls kind of independent from the phones means someone who's more athletic than me and wants to go for a jog can leave their phone at home, but then make a call either just casually or in an emergency situation straight from their wrist through the cellular network. And that could be pretty huge, I think, for some people. Emergency calls while running is important to me, I think. That seems like it could be relevant to my interests. Because I don't have an Apple Watch, and I've always kind of wanted one. I've just never bought one. Right. Which I think is the place where a lot of people live, where every time I've been close to buying one, it's been like, maybe I don't really need it. Right. I've enjoyed using it for a while now, but it's not a perfect device, and I'd like to see them make it round because I feel like the square form factor looks a little bit dorky, but I still wear it anyway. I think it's interesting that they say that it gets the same amount of battery life. Right. Even though now it's using a cellular connection. And they were saying that the screen is now going to kind of serve as the antenna, the cellular antenna. Right. So that's kind of some impressive engineering right there if they can make the screen have this kind of dual function. I'm curious, personally, this is information I didn't see, is like what it's going to cost to have your iPhone have a cellular connection. I'm assuming it's going to be something along the lines of... Oh, to have your Apple Watch have a cellular connection? Sorry, to have your watch have a connection. I'm assuming it's like the iPad where it's going to be $15 a month or whatever. But. Right, or if you have an AT&T or data plan for your phone, you tack on also that you can use your Apple Watch with it, so they charge you $15 extra a month, or does it get just kind of grouped into the same amount of data you already have? It's unclear, but I do know that I don't want to pay more for my phone bill. So it'll be interesting to see how that's kind of parceled out. I think the heart rate stuff was interesting that they talked about. You know, that it's now like the most popular heart rate sensor in the world. Right, and they're going to alert you if your heart's pounding too fast or if it notices an arrhythmia. That kind of stuff worries me because the prospect for a false positive or it being able to just, understand, like catch a weird heartbeat and tell you like, hey, your heart just beat weird. Right. Like now it's not like, oh, here's what it is. It's like, hey, your heart is screwing up. Right. And then you can just panic until you figure out what it is. Right. Or it'll be interesting to see like how they have trained it and how they do train it. They may feed kind of the signal that like an atrial fibrillation or something from somebody's heart shows up, how that signal shows up on the watch. And they may feed all those signals into some sort of neural network that kind of learns what it looks like. Right. And then it can hopefully recognize it in the real world with hopefully few false positives and doesn't miss the real positives. So I guess it's part of a Stanford Health study. So it'll be really interesting to see like how that happens moving forward. Yeah, that's what I worry about. And also I didn't quite understand, they said that people's heart rate races for no reason. Well, yeah, like if you think about it, like, when I'm going for a swim, sometimes I monitor my heart rate with the watch and it'll say my peak heart rate was like 120 or 130, and that feels really high. But I think what they're saying is if they notice that you're not moving, but your heart rate is 120, 130, you're just sitting there and your heart's going really too fast, that's when they'll alert you that something's wrong, because it shouldn't be doing that if you're not moving really quickly. Right, unless you're watching like The Fast and the Furious. Or you're scared, exactly. Just by life. Watching the new It movie. It's going off like crazy. I also thought it was interesting that they talked about the retail stores, which are not called stores. Town squares, which makes me want to throw up a little bit in my mouth when I hear them talk about the retail stores being town squares. It feels too much kind of Apple hammering the kind of like community line, that it is a store, it's meant for selling stuff. It's not a town square. But whatever, I guess that's their branding. Yeah, well, it's just an odd thing that they want people to come and hang out at the Apple store. Most stores would rather you just buy stuff and then get out. Right. I guess their thing is if you hang around this stuff long enough, you're just like, well, I need to buy it now. Right. I can't not be around this. Right. I mean, they seem to want them to be kind of centers for education where you can go learn what's happening at Apple today, they call it, and also go to the Genius Bar, which I also heard them refer to as the Genius Grove, if there's trees, I guess. So yeah, they want you to hang out and they want you to buy stuff.
I think it's interesting that they have like this new emphasis on creative professionals that they're talking about, that sort of teach people to do stuff and like our community managers basically, and that, which I think is an interesting, that's good because, not everybody is ready to be a genius and fix computers like me, Like I'm not ready to do that, but you need me to be a community. Hey, well, all right, sure. Let's learn how to draw and paint. That sounds great. But I think overall it was a good event. I mean, I think it was a good way to break in Steve Jobs' theater. I don't necessarily know if iPhone 10 was worth one more thing.
Right. I mean, the question is, everyone expects so much from Apple, and they always hope that the next device is revolutionary in some ways, that I often wonder if there's really anything Apple could do where people wouldn't say, why isn't it revolutionary? Why doesn't it brush my teeth for me or whatever? Like, is there anything that the iPhone 10 doesn't proclaim to do that you kind of wish that it does? Or does it seem like just a pretty good phone that's going to be pretty sweet and now it exists?
I'm wondering what it's going to be like to use it. Like, I really do. Like, the rounded corners, like, at first glance, I hate them. Like, I hate the way it looks.
On the screen, yeah.
Yeah, like, when I first saw it, I hated it. And obviously that might change when you use it.
Right.
Because I've been using Essential Phone, and it has rounded corners on some of the corners, too, and it has a cutout for the camera on the top. And I thought I was going to hate that, but they deal with it in a pretty elegant way. Like, it looks okay. But I mean, in terms of actual functionality, I don't really know what what do I want a phone to do? Like, I use the same 7 apps all day, every day.
Right.
It can't really do those apps much better than it's doing them.
Yeah, and the glass back, we can assume that that's an important part of the wireless charging, but I want a phone that's going to be really resilient, that ideally I could carry without even putting it in a case, because phones themselves usually look pretty nice, and they look worse when you put a case on them. So it'd be cool. I do wonder how robust and resilient will that glass back be.
Yeah, because I definitely cracked the back of mine. That's the only iPhone I ever broke. I've never broken a screen.
Oh, really?
But I'd break the glass back of my iPhone 4S. So I don't know. I guess we'll find out, because I will definitely drop whatever phone I get.
I would rather have an indestructible phone, or a phone that's virtually indestructible but doesn't have wireless charging, than the other way around. But I think it's too soon to say how resilient the phone will be.
Well, and also just something that's not as slippery as a bar of soap when I'm holding it.
Yeah, they are. They always are that way.
But they looks nice. They look shiny.
They do.
They're also impossible to hold on to.
All right, so yeah, we covered a lot today, and stay tuned to PopSci.com, where we're going to be doing a lot of follow-up stories about the iPhone, the new software, things like Face ID, and we're going to be getting a unit in-house hopefully pretty soon, and Stan, hopefully you get a chance to play with it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying iPhone 10. I'm looking forward to trying Apple TV, and I'm not looking forward to running with the Apple Watch.
Yeah, you don't have to. That's optional.
It won't. Don't worry.
Okay.